I'm getting feedback on the phone here. I don't know what. I've got everything I say gets repeated on the phone.
I hear you clearly, 5x5. What kind of equipment are you using there, Chris?
It's a handheld, and I'm going to take it off. Or maybe this is a little better. But I got a call. Happily, I got a call from Michael Shrimpton, who was convicted of seeing something, saying something in England, and he was put in prison in England in February of this year, and he just got out on good behavior just a few days ago, and he has expressed an effort to publish his intelligence work here in the United States. It's already in publication in the United Kingdom or in England. In 2014, Spy Hunter, The Secret History of German Intelligence. And his collaborator, Dr. Robert E. Kaplan, who is emeritus Cornell University, a fellow New Yorker who's now living in Israel, had done the foreword in the book and just reminded the reader that Michael was especially careful because England does not have the same protection or any protection of freedom of speech. So that it was remarked that when Michael wrote the book, Spy Hunter, he used only dead people. so I'm urging him to do an upgraded American version, and with Dr. Kaplan and my associate Eric Jon Phelps, who for the last 35 years has worked diligently on the history involved in the Kennedy assassination, and that he has a book, Vatican Assassins, Murdered in the House of My Friends, in the third edition, and it's an 1,800-page book. He's been interviewed on Doug Hagman and a long list of prominent radio stations, and he's gladly participating tonight to fill in some very interesting history that I think that Michael agrees with. You know, that Eric and I did a book in support of Michael Shrimpton to urge that he be released from prison and that there be an investigation of what's known as the Galen organization, which operates out of London and out of Dachau, Germany, as well as Washington, D.C. Reinhard Galen went into business with Beetle Smith and brought all the records that he had developed with the SS into use, which became the Interpol files and became the basis for the Stay Behind networks, etc. And that Otto Skorzeny, Galen's associate, was involved with. You've heard of the Stay Behind Gladio networks, the Direct Action and Beider Meinhof and Red Brigade, etc. All that was run by the Galen organization. In any event, I am urging Michael, now that he is a free man, to print a new book with the updated intelligence work that Eric and I and Dr. Kaplan have urged him to use American free speech and to name all the names of the living people. So that Eric and I have been working on who the people are behind Obama. And specifically, I sued Brzezinski and his family. Brzezinski's trainer at Harvard was Fritz Kramer, who is definitely a German agent. Robert Kaplan wrote a book called the Soros Connections, George Soros, an agent for Germany in its third attempt to rule the world. And that was issued a number of years ago, and he's urging that this be all brought up to date. And I think Eric is more than happy to bring his connect the dots overview and his direct research experience to bear. What we have discovered is that the Kaiser Wilhelm, after the second, after he pushed Bismarck out after 1891, set out to profiteer on wars that he would conduct, and that he, in effect, created the takeover of the New York financial markets after disposing of McKinley and others, and putting his own presidents in place, including Woodrow Wilson, and that they created the whole basis that they could profiteer on the whole war that they were devising, known as World War I. And the creation of the Federal Reserve through their agent, J.P. Morgan. I just want to remind everybody that the Queen of England is German, not English, and that there was a very interesting article done in the American Thinker in 2011 by a Mondo Fraser called "Who is Barack Obama?" And it was interesting in that under the Nunn-Lugar program, the cooperative threat reduction program for getting rid of missiles, and specifically out of Ukraine, both Lugar and Obama together traveled to Russia, the Federal Republic, and that Obama was singled out by the Russian intelligence and held for 3 hours and interrogated. This is in 2005 for being a British agent, which is interesting. We know him to be a German agent, not a British agent, but that as maybe the program unfolds, we can fill in some of the interesting details that Michael had provided me, and through his book Spy Hunter lays out an outline of how the Mau Mau movement was really a battle between German intelligence and the British, of which the British were in Kenya as a protectorate for the Sultan of Zanzibar, and that the Germans wanted them out, and they used the Mau Mau to do that. And of course, the supposed father, the grandfather of Obama Sr. Was in the Mau Mau, and Obama Sr. ended up as an important finance go-between and money and gun launderer, working with the IRA out of Boston under German intelligence. And certainly Otto Skorzny's connection to the IRA is well known. I was just wondering, Eric, are you there?
No, we haven't picked up Eric yet. If he is, if he's holding on the line out there, he needs to press 1 and talk to Mona so that we can open up his line. That's why I was asking for the first 3 digits, his area code. So if I knew that, I could just punch him up. You know, I thought that when Barack Obama got held up in Russia, he was held up because they were having problems with his passport. Apparently, they had information different, what I understand, than what he was presenting.
Well, I mean, obviously, he's got problems with the passports anyway. But no, I mean, Marcus Wolf with the East German intelligence also was working with the Gehlen Group, and as a double agent starting in the 70s, working with H.W. Bush, and that Marcus Wolf was a handler in African and Asian affairs, and according to the story that I have, is that an Indonesian woman was living in the premise of Obama Sr., in that he provided shelter for her, and it was at that time that she was impregnated, and not by Obama Sr., but by, we believe, Marcus Wolf, who had a track record of implantating. You know, when you want to be sure that there's a genetic connection to your intelligence services, you send women around spreading their legs and having children. So, which is an intelligence tool, but that Obama Sr. was used as a laundering mechanism in order to return Obama Jr. to his mother in Indonesia. Wow. And that I mean, that's the story that needs to be told, and there's documentation still being held under court seal in Hawaii and in Arizona, which will tell that story. That's been under seal since 1994.
Yeah, is there? Listen, by the way, we've got Eric on the line.
Oh, good, good.
Is there a adoption in the works in there somewhere?
Say that again. Over.
Is there an adoption in there somewhere? Some adoption paperwork someplace?
Well, in order to launder a person, I mean, adoption by paperwork is what it's all about. Right. And when you don't want to make it official, then you do it through marriages. And but definitely Stanley Ann Dunham is absolutely not the mother genetically. There's no connection genetically to Obama. And that there is Obama's sister, Indonesian sister, doesn't, there is no connection, let's put it that way. So Stanley Ann Dunham is not the mother. We know less about this man as we go on, Ed, and that's why the intrigue that we want to talk about tonight, that being that the real battle in Europe was to smash the Protestant Germany under Bismarck and to turn everything over to the Bavarians, the Wittelsbach family, which it appears that the Franco-Prussian War generated as an outcome of the war in 1871. Of course, that was the year that Vatican I occurred, and in which Victor Emmanuel had essentially said to the Pope, who was under house arrest, basically saying, you can have spiritual power, but Victor Emmanuel had temporal power, so that the Pope under house arrest got all antsy and held Vatican I and declared himself infallible. So it's pretty humorous when you think about it. But that end of the history, I think Eric is a wonderful historian, and he's been doing this for years, and I, without saying too much more, I'd like to introduce him. Eric, are you there?
Yes, pleasure to be with you, Chris and Ed. Thank you for having me on and for your listeners listening.
Well, good to have you on. We're always hungry for information on Barack Obama and his past. There seems to be changing iterations every day. The only thing we know for sure is that his existing narrative is a complete fabrication. We're aware of that. Putting together the truth is really what we're after and trying to find, and that's one of the reasons we definitely want to have you on board this evening, was to get your perspective on the research that you guys have done in order to find that out. And I know that, there's been a lot of us here that have been working on this for years, and we still haven't done anything definitive that we know, but you guys may have rounded that corner. So take it away. Tell us what you found out. I understand you have some new information.
I have on my PowerPoint of 2008 that I sell on my website, a fact that I came across when William F. Buckley, a Knight of Malta, who said in the 1980s, "We will have a black president." So they already had that in the making then. The other thing is that Barack Obama, it was trained by Jesuit Greg Galuzzo in Chicago, and it was Greg Galuzzo that made him a member, or had him join the Gamaliel Foundation, of which Greg Galuzzo, the Jesuit, had founded. So Barack Obama, whatever his name is, I always call him Barry Davis Obama, but this man is a complete and total tool of the Jesuits out of Chicago, and that's why the Jesuits running the Chicago Democratic machine put him up for presidency, and then in control of both political parties, really, then made him president with the aid of the intelligence community, of course, that Jesuits run, but also the press. So Barack Obama is a creation of the Vatican. The Jesuits run him. He will do exactly what he's told. His white handler, Roman Catholic Joe Biden, has 2 honorary Jesuit degrees, one from the University of Scranton in Pennsylvania, and the other is from St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. So the Jesuits run him, and they run him through Biden. The Jesuits are in control of John Boehner, a fourth-degree Knight of Columbus, Speaker of the House. They're also in control of a Jesuit chaplainess in the House, and now they're going to get the Pope there. So it's one great, huge Jesuitical, papal control of the executive branch of government, and Obama is just their step and fetch it.
Well, are any of them Muslim? Because he seems to be leaning in that direction a lot more than anything else. I'm telling you, with everything that he's done, he's about as far from any side of God I can see.
Well, there's no doubt that he has Islamic connections. But remember, the Jesuits the Vatican created Sunni Islam. The Quran was written in the Vatican. Islam is nothing more than Roman Catholicism for people of color. They have the only woman in the Quran mentioned is the Mary. They count their beads. They have crusades called jihads. They have a center city called Mecca. They have a specific language called Arabic. I mean, it's absolutely the twin sister of Romanism, except for people of color, for the purpose of killing off the Arab Christians in North Africa who were truly Bible-believing Christian people. So wherever Islam raises its sword, some enemy of the Pope's going to die. So Obama, being totally controlled by the Vatican, is indeed a Muslim. There's no doubt about that in my mind. He goes to an apostate Christian church with the hatefully racist mulatto pastor. What was his name? The ex-Marine.
Right, Reverend.
Right.
Reverend. Right.
Reverend, quote unquote, right. And no man should be called Reverend. Only the Lord is Reverend. And so he was created for this. I maintain Obama was created for the purpose of inciting a black-on-white race war in this country, to then justify all the white people being driven into right-wing fascism, that if we're not careful, someone like Donald Trump will spearhead it. So that's their game, race war into right-wing fascism, and Obama is completely a part of this.
Well, I'll tell you what, I can see the divisions coming from this guy. I mean, almost virtually from day one. He hasn't been a person that's been trying to put this country together. He's done everything he can to divide it, split it, women against men. It's just incredible. How are you able to decipher or find this information, Eric?
Well, through a long period of personal investigation on this. I have a lot of it in my book. And, of course, Obama comes along and he fits right into the game plan. Nothing changes. So, I recommend my book, Vatican Assassins, Wounded in the House of My Friends. You can get it on my website, Vatican Assassins. You can get it on my radio station, 247worldradio.com and /mobile, and you can listen to it without a download. So you can get it from either one of those places.
Now, you're saying that they really are using Joe Biden? He doesn't seem to be the sharpest knife in the drawer, from what I can tell.
No, Joe Biden is the sharpest knife in the drawer. He knows where all the bodies are buried. He feigns stupidity.
Okay.
This guy was put there to monitor their Manchurian candidate, to make sure that he signs everything he's supposed to sign. All Obama knows how to do is give a speech, and not very well. But Biden, he's the guy that is involved in getting certain of these Roman Catholic Supreme Court justices confirmed on the Supreme Court. So Biden is the real man of power here. He's Speaker pro tempore of the Senate. This guy is powerful. He's intelligent, and he feigns like he's an idiot when in fact he's running things or overseeing Obama. Wow.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's definitely surprising to me because he to me, he seemed, well, even when he was in the Senate, just in the Senate, he didn't appear to me to be anything substantial. Now, what about these overseas connections? What does this crew have to do with Saudi Arabia and some of this stuff happening over her influence from the Middle East?
Well, Saudi Arabia was created in 1932, and the one responsible for that primarily was Winston Churchill. Benito Mussolini also had a hand in it, but the Pope created it. And what he did was he gave the holy sites of Islam to the Saudis, who are Wahhabis. And the Wahhabis were created by the British in the 1700s. one specific British Freemason that was involved in it was the one who wrote Arabian Nights. What was his name? Richard Burton, Sir Richard Burton, the first white man to go to Mecca.
Right.
So they gave Arabia to the Saudis in 1932, and the Knights of Malta had the largest commercial deal in world history in 1934 with the oil concession that they have. I have it in my book. And so the Knights then began to build Saudi Arabia as a huge oil monopoly for the purpose of sucking the finances of the West out of historic white Protestant Reformation North America and Canada into the Middle East for the purpose of rebuilding a second Sunni caliphate. That was their design, and it's being furthered at this moment. So they had to make Saudi Arabia rich, and so they gave it to their Saudi family that was in complete and total control of the Vatican. They're also high-level Muslim Freemasons.
Okay. I had no idea that there were Muslim Freemasons.
Oh, absolutely. There's huge lodges. They have a huge lodge in Cairo and a huge lodge in Istanbul.
I'll be darned. That's amazing. I had no idea.
Well, it's important to emphasize that a 32 level Shriner enters the temple in the same location as a Muslim Freemason.
Yeah, the Shriners are nothing but Islamic Freemasonry. And furthermore, Obama, he's a Mason. Al Sharpton, he's a Freemason. Louis Farrakhan, fomenting a race war in this country, is a Freemason. What's his name? Jesse Jackson, he's a Freemason. Colin Powell. That's exactly right. Bill Cosby was Boule Society. I call him Martin Lucifer King. He was Boule Society. All these guys are Masons and secret society members controlled by what I call the Pope's white power structure. So they're absolutely total traitors to the black people of this country.
Wow. Yeah, I can see that. I suppose because of the Chicago connection, that's how they were able to get somebody to phony up or doctor up this draft registration card that we know is. You know anything about that?
I don't, but I do know that the Archbishop of Chicago runs everything in the city. And at the time, when Obama was coming to power, it was Francis Cardinal George. The second most powerful churchman in this country is generally the Archbishop of Chicago, the first being the Archbishop of New York, and maybe a tie with the Archbishop of Washington, D.C. But between those three cardinals, they are the most powerful men in this country, short of the Jesuit 10 provincials.
So basically, it's your opinion that these guys that are pulling the strings on Obama?
Well, absolutely.
Well, it should be pointed out that the ACORN organization that started out in Arkansas was heavily funded by the Conference of Bishops, and that came about primarily through John Paul II, or John Paul VI, or not John Paul, Paul VI. I'm sorry, Paul VI, the Freemason.
Yeah, Freemason. So was Pius XII. He was another Freemason. But if you read the book in God's Name by David Yallop, you'll see all these cardinals and archbishops that were high-level Freemasons involved in the murder of John Paul I. So Masonry is run by the Jesuits. The Jesuits control all factions by the various different kinds of Freemasonry, whether it's Scottish Rite, which is centered in the Piazza del Gesù in Rome, next to the Jesuit Mother Church, the Gesù, or whether it's Grand Orient Freemasonry, whatever you want to call it, is all co-opted or founded or all the rights written by the Jesuit order, and they control everything through Freemasonry or the Roman hierarchy or through the Knights of Malta or the Knights of the Equestrian Order or the Knights of Columbus. All these different knighthoods and brotherhoods ultimately are controlled by the Jesuit Superior General, who is today Adolfo Nicolas.
Wow. Well, like I said, I had absolutely no idea what was going on, who was running this major cabal. I find it interesting that they would be behind all the debauchery that's happening here in this country, you know, with the gay marriage and the LGBT stuff and everything else that's going on. I would have thought something like that would have been repulsive to the church.
Oh, no. 95% of all the priests are homosexuals.
Well,
it should be pointed out.
Yeah, the whole homosexual movement, you can comment on this, Chris, the whole homosexual movement was caused by the Jesuits, and you have the facts there, Chris.
Right. Vincent O'Keefe, who was associated with Jansen's and Arupe, ran Fordham University during the Stonewall riots in New York City. I was overseas at the time, but I since found out about it. He did a series of editorials saying that the homosexual movement must put themselves together as the new civil rights movement. That was, I believe, in '68 when the Stonewall riots happened. So Fordham ran the whole homosexual. This is Vincent O'Keefe, very powerful.
Vincent O'Keefe, very, very powerful American Jesuit. In fact, they were considering him to be a general, but they decided no American could ever be Jesuit superior general. But Vincent O'Keefe, absolutely very, very powerful. Vincent O'Keefe knew that American Jesuit that was in the KGB for 17 years, who was from Pennsylvania. He's buried over here in the novitiate here in Wernersville, Pennsylvania. And also, he's tied in with George Herbert Walker Bush. And Bush is very much connected with Fordham Jesuits. So the Fordham Jesuits...
What is your definition of a Jesuit?
A Jesuit, the term originates with John Calvin, because Calvin was the absolute enemy of the Jesuit order. They hated him. They hated his doctrine. Of course, Calvin was one of the key figures who brought about the Protestant Reformation, which gave birth to Western civilization, the rise of the middle class, free enterprise, and everything we enjoy today, all a result of the Protestant Reformation. So the Jesuits hated him, and so he coined the term for them called the Jesuits, and really the Society of Jesus is also was also originally known as they were known as the Soldiers of the Virgin Mary, and they later changed it to the Society of Jesus, but it's the Revived Knights Templars, except 1,000 times worse. Okay. They run all the banking, all the politics. They run all the intelligence communities. Gregorian University in Rome is really the center of all the intelligence communities. They all work together.
Really? Wow.
Yep. Walter Ciszek. Walter Ciszek was the American Jesuit who spent 17 years in Soviet Russia as an inquisitor, killing hundreds of thousands of Russian Orthodox people in the Gulag. And they portrayed him as some kind of a hero in this country when he was brought back by Kennedy under a spy trading deal in 1962-63. And then Ciszek wrote his work with God in Russia as though he's some sort of persecuted man in the Gulag. No, he was busy killing thousands of Orthodox men. And over here in the novitiate, the ex-novitiate, now it's a spiritual center here in Wernersville, he's buried, and his gravesite is the only site with a whole bunch of beads on it. And the Jesuit Superior General, Peter Hans Kolvenbach, came over here in 2000 or 2001 and personally decorated the grave of Walter Ciszek.
Wow.
Yep.
That's amazing. Yep. Hiding in plain sight.
Hiding in plain sight.
I think the listeners. This is a brand new angle that the listeners are being introduced to, Eric. So maybe you should give a little bit more background on this, because certainly Loyola as at the time of Christopher Columbus was a military operative. The Jesuits are military. They're not a religious order.
It's called the Company. In fact, they have a magazine, a monthly magazine called Company. And as we know, there's another group called the Company, and that's the CIA. Because the CIA is completely modeled after the Jesuit order. The early heads of the CIA were Knights of Malta. Walter Beadle Smith was a knight. Patton hated him. Patton said he will not be a pallbearer in my funeral, and he had his black sergeant be a pallbearer, Sergeant Meeks. But Walter Beadle Smith was an absolute traitor, in league with the Knight of Malta, Wild Bill Donovan, who wanted to be the first head of the CIA, but was not, thank God. But there have been many others that were heads of the CIA, like Leon Panetta was a Knight of Malta, William J. Casey, Knight of Malta, educated by the Jesuits at Fordham University. So their universities produce all these officers in the CIA and FBI and wherever, and their first loyalty is to the Jesuits who train them. Remember, the purpose of the Jesuit order is to restore the temporal power of the Pope worldwide. That is, the Pope has the right according to the doctrine of Rome, with his doctrine of temporal power, he has the right to rule the government of every country on earth. Nobody has the right to be self-governing. They all must be reduced to the temporal power of the Pope. And this is how we understand history for the last 500 years. This is how we're going to understand the Bolshevik Revolution, carried out by the Jesuits with certain court Jews out of New York City. And then the first thing they're going to do is they're going to shove the Gregorian calendar down the throats of the Russian people, and the Gregorian calendar was written by a Jesuit, Christopher Clavius. And then Lenin is going to readmit the Jesuits into Russia in 1922 after they had been expelled from Russia since 1820 by the great Tsar Alexander I, who was murdered by the Jesuits in 1825. So with this understanding of the Jesuits being the Marines, the avant-garde of the papacy, they go in and launch the attack, they take over the country, and then they bring in all their agents to maintain the government that they've imposed. And this was done to us in America on March 9th, 1933. That was the coup d'etat that took over this country for the benefit of the Roman papacy, and we've been under military government ever since. And if you don't believe me, go into any state or federal courtroom and see the flags that are military colors, all trimmed in gold fringe, giving you a military due process of law.
Yes, even my congressman office has a gold-fringed flag. Yes.
Yep.
Well, it should be pointed out that in '59, Eisenhower is the commander-in-chief, and this is backed up by the Attorney General's office with a memorandum, that it was only by the commander-in-chief that the two stars were added as a military flag to be displayed with fringe on the inside and without fringe on the outside. But the only official civil flag is approved by Congress, is a 48-star flag. Otherwise, it is the Commander-in-Chief 59, Eisenhower, who Michael Shrimpton said was a German asset, was the one who installed the fringe on the flag.
And furthermore, I have my Air Force intelligence guy, John, who I conferred with for a long time. He told me that he knew Frank Shakespeare, who was a High Knight of Malta. He was the head of CBS, and he told him that Eisenhower was a Knight of Malta. So that Eisenhower was a crusader for Francis Cardinal Spellman in Europe to kill targeted populations and individuals designated by Francis Cardinal Spellman overseeing Eisenhower, for which reason Eisenhower made him president, Spellman made him president in 1952. Yes, was because Spellman was the American Pope. Spellman was the most powerful churchman in this country at the time, also overseeing the assassination of John F. Kennedy, our first Roman Catholic president,
who refused to allow Spellman to hold a mass in the White House, which
That's
really
correct.
That's
correct.
That was the nail in JFK's coffin.
Spellman hated his guts. That's right. JFK would not allow Spellman to listen to the daily CIA brief, where he had been accustomed to do it under Eisenhower. Eisenhower wrote a book called Crusade in Europe, and he tells you that he's in fact really the crusader leading all the Allied forces to do what he's told to do. Like, for example, sacrifice all the Russian soldiers who fought with German uniforms against the Red Russian Army. They were called Vlasov soldiers by Andrei Vlasov, who was a great Russian patriot. And Eisenhower betrayed all of Vlasov's soldiers to send them all back to Stalin so they could all be tortured and have their throats cut. This is what Eisenhower did to the Russian patriots who were against Joseph Stalin.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. I had no idea all this stuff was going on. Well, what in your opinion can we do to fix this? Do you have an idea?
Yes, I think I think people need to elect Chris Strunk, and the first thing he's going to do, the first thing he's going to do is he's going to repeal the Emergency Banking Relief Act. And when the Emergency Banking Relief Act is repealed, this entire military government crumbles, because it's the Emergency Banking Relief Act that approves and confirms Proclamation 2040 of March 9, 1933, and it's the Emergency Banking Relief Act that amends Section 5B of the Trading with the Enemy Act to apply inside the country. So once the Emergency Banking Relief Act is repealed, no more forces overseas, No more possibility to declare martial law. No more military government. We're going to go back to civilian due process of law in the courts, and we're going to all the gold will be returned to the people because they confiscated the gold with Executive Order 6102 on April 5th, 1933. By May 1st, all gold had to be turned in. They did that all under the Trading with the Enemy Act as amended by the Emergency Banking Relief Act. The whole thing crumbles when this keystone statute is removed.
Well, I hate to depress the listeners, think that I'm the only possibility for a solution, but I think that anybody listening who's running for president who is going to be in the position to do something about this is to look seriously at the Emergency Banking Relief Act. And just recently, I ran across the book On Our Way, printed by FDR in '34, which he gloated on the success as a result of bringing inland the Trading with the Enemy Act from World War I. The listeners are not familiar with a lot of this terminology, Eric, and I perhaps we can look at it.
What they can do is take my course. They need to take my course. I have a 3-day course on this. I think they'll love it. I'll bring them all up to speed on what has happened, especially with the Emergency Banking Relief Act and most things thereafter. The 4 proclamations that we're still under today, that all of them need to be terminated by the president or just have the Emergency Banking Relief Act repealed. So
we're going to need a change of venue in the White House before anything like that's ever going to happen. I know we had a meeting with my congressman yesterday, and we didn't even get to some of the things I wanted to talk about. Part of it was the numerous constitutional violations that are going on concurrently. With the NDAA, that thing. The Congress is supposed to coin money and determine the value thereof. None of that's happening. I wanted to get into that.
But the reason, Ed, why none of that's happening is because we're not. The government is not limited by the Constitution. The de jure constitutional government that would never take away our gold, that would never take away our silver, that would never garrison soldiers overseas, are for this extended period of time, our de jure constitutional government with limited powers created by the Constitution, by the Protestant Constitution, is gone. It's been temporarily ousted since March 9th, 1933, and it has been replaced with a temporary de facto military government. And that's why they can do all these things. There's nothing they can't do.
Well,
of course it's unconstitutional, but they're not bound by the limitations of the Constitution.
Exactly. This is what I wanted to talk about. There hasn't been a single candidate out there, including Trump, that's talking about this sort of thing. Look, there's a lot more people out here that are aware of this situation, more that aren't, but there are a lot of people that are aware of it. Myself and a number of other people that I was with at the meeting, they're aware of that, and we wanted to talk to Burgess about that. And I wanted to find out if there are any presidential candidates that are even thinking that way, other than you, Christopher. But
well, let me quote from page 35-36 of the book On Our Way, written by FDR, who is ghostwriter. He stated, quote, "But the full meaning of the word emergency related to far more than banks. It covered the whole economic and therefore the whole social structure of the country." And it goes on at the end of the paragraph. "We could never go back to the old order," end quote.
That's right. That's exactly right. And FDR says the very same thing in his inaugurational speech. He said that the old order of things will be set aside during this temporary emergency, something to that effect. I have it in my class. He tells you right there we're departing from the regular order of affairs, which means constitutional limited government. And they did it, and they don't ever intend to go back. So, because it's after this now, they're going to build the Pentagon. Well, who's the big builder of the Pentagon? John McShane. He had a huge construction company in Philadelphia. And what's John McShane? A good Knight of Malta. So the Knights of Malta built the Pentagon, they man it, and they control all the wars in the world out of the Pentagon because this is the center of the New World Order, controlling all the other intelligence agencies, including the FSB, the German BND, British intelligence, all of it is all dovetailed with Pentagon and NSA.
Through the Jesuits.
through the Jesuits running Georgetown University. Georgetown University is the capital of the United States of America. They write most of the legislation to be introduced, like the Patriot Act, like the NDAA, and they're going to bring it into the vaginal Oval Office of the Virgin Mary at the White House, at the West Wing, introduce it to the president, he gives it to one of his cronies in the Congress, and then they pass it. That's how the Jesuits get things done in this country.
I heard some leanings that there's something's fixing to happen in September. Do you know anything about that? What it has to do with the UN?
Well, the Pope's going to be here on the 25th. that's Pope, for sure.
The great warrior of the world himself, the great pretender to be the vicar of Christ when he's the vicar of Horus, he's coming here for a war council with his archbishops and cardinals. That's what he's doing. This is all for war and temporal power. Has nothing to do with religion or anything righteous or pure and holy.
It should be pointed out that the Minsk Treaty has evaporated, and that Berezovsky, who was the fellow who lost the election against the Ukrainian Orange movement, he is Biden's man. He is Georgetown's man. They're pushing for war. They're pushing for an attack on the two Donetsk and the other beleaguered East Ukrainian cities, which will be wiped out and slaughtered, and they're trying to force the Russians to invade. Now, and that makes sense.
That makes sense. But if I can add this, remember the Eastern Ukraine is primarily Orthodox. The Western Ukraine is primarily Roman Catholic. So we have to keep that in mind.
And certainly the Habsburgs screwed things up so badly, and from 1914 on that. They were the ones that created that mess, and that.
And remember, the Habsburgs are some of the most powerful Knights of Malta in Europe.
But certainly, it appears that we're being pushed into using NATO and this be a conflict. Look, Eric, you were doing Reforger in Europe. I was Reforger when I was in Europe in the Air Force, and that we always were practicing tank battles, and that. We are right now, I remember this for years, but we are right now in the worst situation we've ever been in history.
Do you remember who was the head of NATO at the time? Alexander Haig.
Well, that was under you. Oh, did he come in under Nixon? Under Nixon.
So he was Knight of Malta, and his brother Francis Haig is a Knight of Malta that still teaches physics at the Loyola Marymount University in Baltimore. Yep.
Huh. I'll be darned.
Well, but certainly what we're talking about here, Eric, is the treaty, the Hague Convention, which came in the latter part of the 1800s, and that any military government has to operate under the Hague Convention, and that it's. I think we both agree of the importance that the Hague Convention and essentially the conduct of military and occupation of an invaded country. That is really where, and that seems to be the letter of the law which we operate under now, this temporary military government.
It makes sense because according to Article 6 of the Constitution, all the treaties are the supreme law of the land, and so therefore if you put the country under military government, then that treaty would then become the supreme law of the land too. So. But there seems to be an out because you see that Hague Treaty was modeled after the Lieber Code, and the Lieber Code was created by a German and then adopted by Lincoln in 1863 under General Orders 100. That makes provision for the commander-in-chief not to bother the private citizens. So maybe our remedy is that we not be subject to this military jurisdiction is through the Hague Convention.
Well, I'm certainly pushing. I'm pushing a private treaty of peace for private individuals, and to go back to the position post limine, the status which we had as if before 1933. So that
yes.
And that is it possible to do a treaty of peace as an individual who has reestablished their status under that provision? I think it's recognized by the Hague Convention. But I mean, we're into the weeds here, and certainly.
I guess for the listeners, for the purpose of the listeners, our citizenship status changed on March 9th, 1933. We became from private citizens to these public U.S. citizens, and to be treated like a corporation, which is why every individual, like a corporation, owes the heavy progressive socialist communist income tax. So. Yep. This whole status issue is very, very, very important for the listeners. We have to be restored to a pre-1933 private national citizenship status as protected by Section 1 of the 14th Amendment.
So, get rid of the Emergency Banking Relief Act. It's going to take a president that's going to sign a bill in order to do that, correct?
Well, it should. The House could pass, pass it, and it's passed by the Senate. It has to be done by the Congress.
A veto proof, or getting rid of executive orders 24.
Yes,
gotcha.
Veto proof, something like that.
See, what section 12 USC Appendix 9B 95B did? No. 95B allowed all the executive orders to be legal.
Yes, that's right. 95B said all the executive orders from March 4th, 1933 to the present are all approved and confirmed. That was carte blanche. Whatever you say in proclamations, we approve.
And that's the difference between what that's the absolute difference, where the executive orders become the law of the land under the commander-in-chief. And that's why
because the Jesuit design is to move power out of the Congress into the president as commander-in-chief. The Jesuits want absolute power centered in the hands of one man functioning as a military dictator. That's how it is in every communist country. That's how it is in this communist country.
Yes, I was going to say you're exactly right. That's kind of what we got right now.
Sure.
Well,
the pen and the phone went all the way back to that big wooden radio under FDR.
Yeah. While we're speaking of presidents, do you guys see anybody on the horizon that's got any possibility of doing something like this?
Well, I've been in touch with the Trump organization, laying out. My expertise is election law on the state level, and I would urge him to take over the New York State Republican Party. Cox came out, the head of the Republican Party here in New York. Cox came out and attacked him, and they're trying to force him out of the party. And that I would urge Mr. Trump and his organization to, before the middle of October, when the enrollment in the Republican Party closes, it's called lockbox, that he do an enrollment drive turning anti-socialist Democrats into Republicans so they can vote for him. And in the event that he's thrown out of the party, or what the Republicans do is they steal the electors. They have the power to do that, unlike the Democrats. And that's, Mr. Trump did not really fill in the details of, he was saying that he was going to be treated right by the Republicans. What he was actually saying is that he wasn't going to tolerate his electors being stolen from him. And that happened several times in the past. So that he's got to build an organization by making Democrats into Republicans so they can vote for him in the primary. He can put together his electoral slate. And if necessary, he will have an organization, feet on the ground, in which he can become a third-party candidate. But he's got to do it through the Republican Party, as far as I'm concerned, because that's the way the system is set up. It's Democrat-Republican.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. And something else too. I want you to understand something, Chris. I've been fighting this battle kind of like you in a different way, and I decided to start getting involved in some local Republican politics to find out what's going on, kind of test the air, see what's happening. And I'm going to tell you something right now. There's no love for the Republican leadership right now, none at all. As a matter of fact, there are people here that are some pretty heavy hitters that have said, I'm not sending another nickel to these guys. Not one. They're staying in the party to try to make a change, but if somebody else walks through the door that's speaking their language, they're gone. But they do realize right now that the Republican Party is the it's the elephant in the room, and we got to pretty much entertainment if we possibly can to have the best effect. But they're really pissed off. I mean, just think about it.
Why shouldn't they be? The Republicans are doing exactly the same thing that the Democrats are doing. What's the difference?
Yeah, but it is. We're not asking for anything. Just truth and justice, basically, and an equal playing field.
What I believe what we want is we want a candidate for president who's going to say, listen, we're going to do away with this temporary military government because there's no longer a national emergency, and we're going to reimpose our limited de jure constitutional government with all of its limitations and wonderful protections for we the people. That's all he really needs to say. Nothing more.
It's notable that Mr. Trump has not spoken on the Constitution yet that I can hear. I haven't heard him speak of the Constitution.
I haven't heard him say a word. I heard him say that he was interested in keeping affirmative action going, kind of off the cuff. Wasn't too pleased about that. But getting back to the subject, I happened to bump into some person the other day that we were talking, and I said, I can't send another nickel to the Republican Party. It isn't. They walked away from us, and this individual said, "Well, my money goes to Sheriff Arpaio." I said, "Mine too," because he's the only son of a what out there that's actually doing something for this country, and that is trying to expose the fake and fraud that's in the White House right now. He could be busted for felonies tomorrow if they would just pursue it, and they're not doing it. Mitch McConnell said the Tea Party people need to be punched in the nose. Boehner's given IRS a wink and a nod when they went after the Tea Party for not getting their 501c3s or whatever, and running them through the gauntlet on audits, tax audits. I'll tell you, they're cutting their own throats. They don't know it. But something the other day, I went to a Keller Town Hall, and I confronted my congressman. Didn't confront him, basically. I just wanted to give him some information, and I wanted some help on some stuff. And we talked about John Boehner earlier in the evening, and I had told him that I had actually read this report that came out on the news that John Meadows said that he wanted to replace him as Speaker. And John Boehner had McCarthy and Scalise get on the phone and start working up some people for a vote to make sure that Boehner stayed in office. And they got back to him and said, "Boss, you ain't got it. You don't have the support. We better take another look at this." So things are changing, and I think that there's no love lost between the Republican base and the leadership right now. I mean, that's all I hear. Them complaining about them people, and it's on a state level as well.
Well, here's another example. Let's talk about Chief Justice John Roberts.
Oh yeah.
Isn't he a Republican? I think he is, isn't he?
What's odd?
Yeah, Chief Justice John Roberts was supposed to not go along with the Obama Socialist Communist Health Bill. Okay?
Right.
He's the breaking vote.
Oh, yeah.
And he passes it. And then the next day he flies to Malta, and he's inducted into the Knights of Malta.
What? Roberts?
Yeah. Yes, John Roberts was inducted into the Knights of Malta on a Monday. Yeah, for a job well done. So you got the Chief Justice as the Knight of Malta. You got Leon Panetta, who's Secretary of Defense. He's the Knight of Malta. These guys are running everything for the benefit of the papacy, controlled by the Jesuits of Georgetown.
It should be pointed out that Obama's got more Knights of Malta in his administration than any previous president in history.
Yeah, and he's got more of them that read the Quran on a daily basis, too. And, listen, Chris, I wanted to tell you, you said you do something about voting laws in the states, or what about that? Well,
it's first of all, the president is not elected popular. There's no popular vote. It's done through the Electoral College. But that every state has a different law. It's up to the state legislature to determine how the electors are put together as a slate.
Okay.
And that I had contacted the Trump organization, and I had recommended that they they get a closer handle or a tighter hold on the New York State election law. Because if you don't understand election law, you can't do what you need to do, especially if you run as a third party. But that, as far as what I would do, although I have major disagreements with Mark Levin, who seems to be wearing blinders on the NBC issue, is that, and his support of Cruz is just outrageous, being that Cruz was born in Canada, and only one of his parents was an American citizen. But that I agree with Levin to repeal the 17th Amendment and put the choice of the senators back in the hands of the legislature.
Absolutely.
Because they absolutely know what the state needs. And right now, there's no reason to have a senator. I can't think of one reason to have a senator. None.
That's right. You're right.
You're right.
But, as you know, the Senate was set up to represent the states. The House of Representatives was set up to represent the people of the states. So there should never, ever, ever be a direct election of U.S. senators. Ever.
That's right. You're absolutely right. I know there is so much wrong with this country and the Constitution and so on. But Chris, I wanted to get back to you with something here. Every state has their own laws, rules, and regulations about votes, voter fraud, and so on. I want to read you something here. This is section 273.001, investigation of criminal conduct. If two or more registered voters of the territory covered by an election present affidavits alleging criminal conduct in connection with the election to the county or district attorney having jurisdiction in that territory, the county or district attorney shall investigate allegations. If the election covers territory in more than one county, the voters may present the affidavits to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General shall investigate the allegations. Now, we have got some allegations here in Texas about criminal conduct in two elections here in the state of Texas, and we're going to pursue that. Do you know of any other states that have a clause such as that where other people could join in and venture the same thing?
I wish we had it in New York. I served about 17 district attorneys in counties, and that their response to me is that they have political discretion and they don't have to do anything. I served complaints. That was my 2012 case where I served complaints of criminal conduct on the part of the electors. So I wish we had that. Actually, Texas has a lot more teeth in law than we do here in New York. I think Arizona may have a similar law. I'd have to look it up again. I was doing some work with somebody who had run for a judge, and every state has their own structure, and the federal requirement on the election is that it's got to be done on a specific date. Otherwise, the legislature controls it. I do not. I think that's a very interesting law there in Texas. I think it gives standing.
Right.
It gives standing.
Right. Well, like I said, we're gonna pursue that. Listen, folks, tomorrow night we're going to have Eric Rush, and he's surely going to have a barn burner as well, I'm sure. And his guest is going to be Jim Curry. I haven't heard a lot about Jim, but we're going to tomorrow night. Our call-in number, folks, is 347-989-8853. You got to dial 1 in order to talk to our crack researcher Mona and call screener. And with that, you guys ready for a caller?
Sure.
All right, Pam, good evening. How are you? The guys are online for you.
Hi, I'm listening to you talk about laws when we're in a lawless society right now. So it's really kind of difficult to grab a hold of this, and it's continual about voting and lawless society when all we can see is an infiltration of our country of New World Order and Sharia law. And as a mother of all my children serving in the military, I vehemently express that they took an oath to a constitution, and I feel that we need to be the leaders of this, of our country, and whether, no matter what race, religion, or creed they are, if you're an American, this is what we need to follow. And it's really difficult to listen to talk about laws and voting when we're in such a lawless society.
Right.
These soldiers have taken an oath, and many of them defend that oath, and that's what they're supposed to defend. And I just want to stay focused on we the people, the Constitution, and the oath, not only for ourselves, but for these soldiers who are being, who are putting their lives on the line for us.
Right.
Well, could I say something in that regard?
Sure, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that this country is occupied by a structure of the creditor structure. The trustee works not for we the people. Trustee works for the creditors of the country with a military government. The military government is alien. When the Constitution is suspended, it is under the Hague Convention. There is a requirement that the occupied inhabitants not be made to take an oath to the military government, but they have an opportunity to be neutral, and that's Hague Convention. Now, what needs to be done, because everybody was turned in and they were registered, their name was registered in commerce, they need to cease to be the surety for the name in commerce, and they need to change their status by registering that status with the Secretary of the Treasury. But I was in the military, Eric was in the military, we both took the oath, and certainly
we both took an
Yeah.
oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. We did not take an oath to uphold this temporary de facto military government that sent you and me around the world, not for the benefit of the American people, but for the benefit of the Pope of Rome that runs this military government. That's my beef. I want de jure constitutional government back. So as long as I don't have it, I can only want to defend the Constitution, but not this present temporary government.
If Pamela, if you look at the Hague Convention on a belligerent who invades the country becomes the occupant, okay, and that the occupying force demands that those that are those that are within the territory of their occupation behave themselves, and they maintain the municipal government, the municipal structures of law. This is under both the law of belligerent occupation that is U.S. Military Judge Advocate General Corps, and this is actually covered in an earlier book by the Pentagon through a man by the name of Berkheimer in 1914, where when you're occupied, you've got to toe the line, or else you're seen as we're seen as an armed force who is trying to resist the occupier. Now, to the extent that we all toe the line and we obey the laws which are on the
statutes, all the statutes of the present military tyranny.
Right.
Or their requirement to use they will use the existing structure of law to the point that it serves their interest to maintain protection of their occupying force and public safety. But at the point that public safety is crossed, they have a duty under the National Defense Authorization Act, and the generals in charge of every district, they have a duty to essentially impose their will on the local structure, and you saw that during the Ferguson riot.
And why can they do that? Why can they do that?
Well, you're asking me.
Emergency
right,
banking
emergency
relief,
banking
Proclamation
relief,
2040. Yeah. All of our problems go back to those two things.
Now, Eric and I just did a submission to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals as amicus, and I posted that on the website, or Mike Boland put it on the website. That is in place. The Union Bank of Switzerland got very nervous. They reassigned the attorney representing Union Bank of Switzerland because of what we did, Eric. And that this is the same attorney in Washington who is handling the case in which the Union Bank of Switzerland gave a total of $100 million to the Clinton Foundation, and that Hillary herself intervened in support of the UBS. Now,
now this is the same UBS, Chris, that the CIA has created 20,000 bank accounts for ISIS. Is this the same UBS?
Yes, according to Scott Barnett.
Okay, so the dear lady that's on the call right now, her sons in the military are going to fight an ISIS that's funded by the CIA through UBS? I think he needs to come home. I think all the soldiers need to come home because the enemies they fight are all funded by this kind of organization.
Well, this kind of stuff has got to stop somehow.
That's right.
I don't know what it's going to take exactly, but it's got to stop. It's insane. It's completely insane. We've been trying as hard as we can to break through some congressmen in order to make some stuff happen. But I'll tell you what, it sure is hard. When you've only got 30 minutes with somebody to get a single point across, it's really hard. But we got to keep pounding. We can't give in. We got to keep moving forward. So ABC News, I understand, talked about your run for presidency.
Oh, yes, they did. They covered. I was surprised.
Yeah.
Of course, they don't read what I do. I mean, they're essentially saying that I sued the 32 persons, including Soros and the Brzezinski family and Obama and McCain and Peter Peterson and Penny Pritzker and a long list of people, including Roger Calero and the Socialist Workers Party. I sued them all for running a fraud against the voters of the state of New York, a constructive fraud. I sued Pelosi, who signed the go-ahead on ballot access. It's the parties who determine the eligibility. But what had happened is that the New York State Board of Election, in support of this fraud, changed the qualification, the eligibility qualification, from natural-born citizen to born a citizen. And that, in effect, is how rotten things are in New York. They covered me, but they stated the wrong issue. I didn't file the case because he was born someplace else. He admitted that his father was a foreign alien student, which meant that he wasn't eligible for a green card and that he was not, even in marriage, he's not eligible. I'm sorry, that's the way it works. Somebody had written to me saying, well, he was eligible for a green card because he was married. Well, no, that's not the way it works. And not with a foreign alien student. But the point is, he admitted that his father was a foreign alien. Right. And therefore, he admitted that he was not natural born. And certainly, Minor v. Happersett and Kim the later case that upheld Minor v. Happersett on the definition holds. And so I went to court on the fraud. And I essentially, the judge assigned to the thing a national socialist who represented the National Baseball League in the strike in the 90s and represented the teachers union. A real crumb bun. He essentially made fun of me, saying that how I'm delusional because I dared to challenge the system, and that's where it comes down. I dared to challenge the system. And he may be right, by the way. I mean, the system is pretty overpowering. I just believe that it's important for a citizen to make a record, a public record. That's what I did. But ABC didn't even cover the issue right, although they covered me. I mean, I as I said to the judge, I said, I'm giving I had 9 sets of attorneys. Soros's attorney was Wilkie Farr. you know, and some of the biggest law firms in the world were in the court, a little courtroom, little beaten up little courtroom. And that there were only two attorneys, Peter Peterson's attorney, and Brzezinski's attorney.
For the listener, just remember that Peter G. Peterson was the head of Blackstone Group. He is a CFR presider, and Peter G. Peterson is a Knight of Malta, and he was also the president of the New York Federal Reserve Bank. This is a man of extreme power.
Wow.
And they didn't like it. They didn't like it. They did 15 total pages in the case and wanted to be paid $82,000.
Oh, jeez. For
15 pages.
Oh,
yeah, double spaced. $82,000.
My God. Well, getting back to Minor versus Happersett, I'll read you that section. It's the opinion written by Chief Justice Morrison Waite. First asked whether Minor was a citizen of the United States. The answer was that she was, citing the 14th Amendment and the earlier common law. Exploring the common law origins of citizenship, the court observed that new citizens may be born or they may be created by naturalization, and that the Constitution does not in words say who shall be natural-born citizens. Under the common law, according to the court, never doubted that all citizens or all children born in a country of parents, plural, who were its citizens, plural, became themselves citizens also. These were natives or natural-born, as distinguished from aliens or foreigners. They made, he took care to write these were natives or born. So associated natural-born with natives, and we know that natives are people that are indigenous to a particular country or area. So clear to me from Minor versus Happersett, Kim One-Ark, or whatever that one is. There's actually 4 Supreme Court cases that mention this phrase or some iteration of it in requiring citizen. And also, by the way, 512 or 511, that disgusting thing that the Senate, the proclamation the Senate put out to make sure McCain could run for president, for goodness sake. They even have, I don't know if it's citizens or parents, but it's plural. The word that they use is plural, so that they cover their ass. Speaking of the state of New York taking out the natural-born citizen, or the qualified under the Constitution, or whatever you were just talking about, Nancy Pelosi signed 2 certificates of nomination, and I'm not sure if it was for Hawaii or what, but specifically, but one had requirement for the candidates to be qualified under the Constitution. The other one did not. And I've been trying to find out which one the state of Texas got, and I'm wondering what states got that particular certificate of nomination. Why?
That was Hawaii.
Okay, and well, I know that the DNC had to know going in that Obama was not qualified, because why would they do that? Why would they feel the necessity to do that? Clearly.
Well, look, all that was submitted as evidence in my court case, both Pelosi and I compared the same affidavits that Boehner had done. Boehner was a defendant in the case because he put McCain on the ballot. The Supreme Court in 1901 made it clear that a territory is not the United States, and that so that being born in is not the United States. And that they tribe and Ted Olson to make a deal for the Democrats and Republicans with their lawmen. That's all the committee had in order to just recommend that this opinion of the Senate, which is not law, be put in place for McCain, the Resolution 511. But that, look, the importance here is allegiance. Allegiance is what the founders were concerned about in 1787. Eric and I took an oath to uphold the Constitution. Now, however, my family had been our sinister newcomer, and that certainly, if his grandfather, who came in about the same time as my grandmother, who came in before 1901 from Prussia, who then married my grandfather, which made her under the Cable Act before the citizen automatically by marriage. That it's important to understand that historically, it's the allegiance that is passed through the parents, and that's why it's parents, plural, because if one of the parents is of a foreign allegiance, that allegiance then to the foreign country passes to the child. So it's the passage of the parents to the child, as well as being a child, imports the allegiance, which is a Roman concept, which Cicero speaks of, and Aristotle before him. But that the problem with multiple allegiances, because the only time I ever actually took an oath was when I went into the military. Otherwise, it is, if somebody becomes naturalized, is swear off allegiance to any prince or however the wording goes to any other state. But that the natural-born citizen, it is per se considered that their allegiance through their parents is to the United States. Of course, hey, just like I say to the keepers, somebody said that in the AH, they still do what they want to do. But the question of the parents is really what Minor Hepper said is addressing.
And this is common law, so I never learned anything like this specifically in civics class, but we got a comment in the chat room.
One thing I'd like to add about the common law.
Yeah.
Remember, the common law was done away on April 25th, 1938. There are no common law rights protected by the Supreme Court as of U.S. versus Carolyn Products, and also there's no general federal common law on a federal level as of the Erie Railroad decision. So there is no common law at all on a federal level, and I think that would have something to do with their ability to alter citizenship and this allegiance issue, because they did away with common law.
Well, how does that change the Constitution?
Doesn't.
Well, it doesn't, but we have a problem in that we don't have access to common law anymore.
We don't have a constitution which is enforced.
That's right, because we don't have a constitutional de jure government that's in place.
We have a de facto.
With this de facto military government, there can be no common law, because military government is always run under Roman civil law, namely Roman equity, which the commander-in-chief can do anything he wants to do. Every judge in all the courts, they're sitting in Roman equity, maintaining the power of the commander-in-chief. That's why they can do anything they want to do. And that's why
we're treated as enemies. We're treated as enemies.
Enemies
right.
and belligerents in occupied territories. Every state, Texas is an occupied territory. Everybody living in Texas is an enemy belligerent under the commander-in-chief. And that's why he can do anything he wants to do. And that's why the dear lady that was the calling said there are no laws. She's right. We're under Roman equity, and they can do anything they want to because it's a declared state of national emergency.
Well, anyway, there's a question in the chat room. I want to know where they can get more proof about this 1933 stuff. That were pre-1933 people. By the way, these programs are archived probably about 10 minutes after we're off the air. It's going to be available for download, and I think there's somehow that you can get a transcript too, by the way. Anyway.
More proof? The individual wants more proof? The proof that he needs, he can get there's a government printing office document that has this all laid out in a chronological order that they can get of 1933.
Okay.
Tells everything that they did from FDR's inauguration on the 4th to oh, by the way, remember all the state governors met in Washington too before this happened.
Okay.
And the state governor that was from Pennsylvania, his name was Gordon Pinchot, and he was the one that led all the governors to back FDR and what FDR would do. And guess what Mr. Pinchot was? Skull and bones.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
So, yes, just Gordon Pinchot was skull and bones. So therefore, Bones, Knights of Malta, Knights of Columbus, Freemasons all worked together so that on March 6th, FDR would issue his Proclamation 2039. That's what your listener needs to read. And then 3 days later, the Congress is going to pass the Emergency Banking Relief Act that approves and confirms the proclamations going back to March 4th of FDR's reign in 33, and then it also amends the Trading with the Enemy Act to then apply to all transactions within the United States. So therefore, if you go buy some bubble gum, you're an enemy and a belligerent in an occupied territory. All transactions are now under the Trading with the Enemy Act, and the Secretary of Treasury is the absolute dictator of all commerce in this country. That's why when you go in a bank, any bank, they're flying a military color, American flag trimmed in gold fringe.
It's interesting that the Trump campaign is now flying the flag without the fringe.
I saw that.
Interesting. Look, the government report, United States Senate Report 93-549, yes. It's called the Emergency Powers Statutes. Is that the report that you're referring to, Eric?
That's it. Yes, it is.
Okay.
And then there's, and that's
Senate report of
that came out.
1933. In that Senate report in 1973, they said the America has been under emergency powers government for 40 years.
Right, and they actually then recommended, they didn't even know how many statutes had been affected under military government, and they discovered 470 of them. Yes. And then what they said, well, we ought to have a better method to record all this so we can keep track of it. And they passed in 1976, they passed the National Emergency Act, and that required on an annual basis that the president renew the emergency, because Congress had absolutely no discretion to end the emergency. It was totally under Executive Order 2030, totally under the power of the president to determine when the emergency or to define what it was.
Yep. Wow. And in that the Enemy Act, the United States Code Appendix 5, United States Code Appendix, United States Code 95A. Those two key issues are the basis for, and they will yield.
Now, what it would require, see, if they repealed the Emergency Banking Relief Act or got rid of saying that this was not going to continue until we said it wasn't going to continue. It says until we decide otherwise, basically.
That's right. That's right. And the reason why they could do that is because the FDR did not do that from the Constitution. The Constitution would have limited him for 2 years. He did it out of a statute that had been amended 14 times from 1918 to 1930, all in preparation for this 1933 coup d'etat. And in 1933, on March 9th, the Trading with the Enemy Act was amended the 15th time, then made to apply all throughout the country when the Commander-in-Chief has seized all labor, all land, and all businesses.
And what's interesting here is I refer back to the FDR book, On Our Way, came out in 1934, where he gloated. And it says on page 4, a friend of mine suggested that some of the war emergency legislation in 1917 had not been repealed, and found for me a statute of that year covering the point. And he goes on to say, in his judgment, it had not been actually repealed by a subsequent general act, and that the whole book is gloating on how they pulled the wool over everybody's eyes. And he said on page 35, but the full meaning of the word emergency related to far more than banks. It covered the whole economic and therefore whole social structure of the country, and we could never go back. That's right. What he said.
That's exactly what he said. The other thing he did not say is that in that entire book, he never mentioned these words, Trading with the Enemy Act.
Right. He only used the reference.
Never.
He only used the number.
Only the statute number. That's
yeah.
I didn't have enough things to worry about. Now I got to work on this thing. Holy smoke!
Yeah.
Well, listen, we've got another caller here. Sergeant Jeffrey Harrison, sir, you are on the line with Chris and Eric.
Well, we're trying to contact judges across our state. So does that mean like we can't do that, or they won't? If we could find a judge that would have a grand jury on Obama's credentials, would we have a shot at this?
No. What I think you should do is, if you're going to contact a judge, you want to ask him this: Judge, are you sitting in an emergency war powers court? Is your court under the Trading with the Enemy Act as amended by the Emergency Banking Relief Act? Ask him that question point blank, and I guarantee you he will not answer you. And when he doesn't answer you, you go to the next judge.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right, so you got to find one that knows what the law is. Is that what you mean?
No, you want to find one that's going to have the courage to say and the patriotism to say, yes, we are. We're under emergency war powers, and we're giving military due process to civilians, and we've been doing it since April 25th, 1938. You don't want a judge that's going to have the guts enough to tell you that, and then that's a judge you can work with.
Okay.
Jeffrey, what's interesting, I went through this last March in 2014. I did an amicus demanding civil due process to a 4-judge panel. And the 4-judge panel on the 4th of March, 2014, agreed that they couldn't give it to me.
Yeah. They couldn't grant him the motion
right.
for civilian due process.
Right, and they did it on the anniversary, the 80th anniversary, or no, the 81st anniversary of the Declaration. So this is the of his inauguration, the 4th of March, 1933. They did it on the 4th of March, 2014. So they know, Jeffrey.
Of course they know. Sure. That's why every judge is a traitor. Every last one of them, until they want to fess up and say, indeed, this is the case. And when they start getting honest, then we might make some progress.
How does this War Powers Banking Act trump the Constitution?
Simple. It imposes a temporary military government and ousts the de jure constitutional government. You can read all about this in Berkheimer's classic work, Military Government and Martial Law.
Well, where does the Constitution say specifically that this can happen?
Well, that's Berkheimer, and basically, yeah.
Berkheimer said it was done out of a statute. The statute was passed, and so they decided to use this statute as a basis for this, and thereby step aside.
Berkheimer did this in 1914, and it grew out of the Spanish-American War. And how does an army actually occupy a invaded and conquered territory? And that all of those provisions are inculcated and part of the military government. There's everything that Berkheimer brings forth then became part of the 12-volume set of the Judge Advocate General structure for devising decisions on occupation. And in particular, Laws of Belligerent Occupation is a volume 11 goes into a lot of the items that can answer that question.
Well, yeah.
By the way, for more information on this, you want to watch the video of. I have it with my course. It's he was the veterinarian, Dr. Schroeder, Eugene Schroeder. You need to watch the video, War and Emergency Powers by Dr. Eugene Schroeder. You can get it on YouTube there. And then you need to read his essay that he wrote, and he gives the whole history of this, how it was done,
right,
and done all through emergency powers that were temporarily imposed by statute.
Yeah, this is the thing. There's nothing in the Constitution that talks about temporary war powers, nothing like that, that allows that to happen. I know there are a lot of
to the contrary. Justice Marshall in McCulloch versus Maryland goes into any necessary means that the necessary requirements set forth for the Congress and the executive to handle emergencies. That's covered in McCulloch versus Maryland.
Yep.
Okay.
But if they would do this to the constitutional power, the stand of state of emergency for 2 years.
Okay, so
by virtue of constitutional power. And Berkheimer talks about this.
Well,
but when they
but
did
by
this,
virtue, no, it's by virtue of the sitting session of Congress that gets reelected every 2 years.
Well, now that's the way it is. But I'm saying now the reason that we're under this temporary emergency war powers indefinitely is because it was done out of a statute.
Right. No, it's a statute in place. This is not like Lincoln was put. Yeah. Like Lincoln had a quorum. He didn't have a quorum, so therefore he used the necessity doctrine, as Chief Justice Marshall discussed in McCulloch versus Maryland. In other words, if you don't have a Congress that can act by statute, then you've got the executive must act as the commander-in-chief.
Yeah, and this is why FDR did. This is why FDR did what he did. It was out of the doctrine of necessity, which Eugene Schroeder quotes a congressman and says, if there's not one of the, this calls it a damnable heresy of the doctrine of necessity.
Well, I tell you what, Congress is not coining money the way they're supposed to and determining the value thereof. They signed the NDAA Act, which has several constitutional violations in it. This is clearly a violation of the Constitution. That needs to be stopped. It's just not something.
But what I'm saying is they have every right to do it because they're under emergency war powers.
Well,
they can suspend the Constitution tomorrow.
They have the appropriation and debt ceiling increase power, and that's it.
Well, where in the Constitution does it say that they have emergency war powers?
That's the necessity doctrine.
So there's the doctrine of necessity. But remember, as I said, they didn't do this under the Constitution. They did it by a sitting statute trading with the enemy.
Right, exactly.
And this, no doubt, was an act of high treason.
Right.
It was ethically wicked, and therefore it needs to be set right by immediately repealing the Emergency Banking Relief Act. Right.
Exactly. Right.
But what it does is to throw what was brought inland, then it stops at the border, so that the private citizen is no longer treated as if they were German enemies during World War I. That's right. In other words, we're treated like the Germans were during World War I.
That's right. That's right.
So we've got to throw it outside the border again, so that you can use the banking system without being considered an enemy.
That's right. When that happens, you don't pay any more federal income tax. The federal income tax is for all persons under the Emergency Banking Relief Act. And when that's repealed, the income tax goes out the window.
Right. They'd have to figure out a new method. I'm for the fair tax, by the way. So.
Well, I'm for impost duties and excises, because when we have a manufacturing base, we don't ever have to have an income tax. Ever.
Well, actually,
only a portion tax for individuals. That's it.
Actually, Trump was discussing that. That was interesting. He was discussing that.
Well, you know, the IRS is just there to finance the Fed. They're just a collection agency for the Federal Reserve, the way I see it, and that all needs to go away. It sure needs to go away, but none of it's going away until the Emergency Banking Relief Act is repealed, because as long as that statute's in place, the IRS has every power to do what the Congress has told them to do, and they can take it all if they want to. Because you're deemed an artificial person in the law, and they can take every last penny if the Congress says so. Listen, example, the golden parachutes. All these guys made millions of dollars. They were taxed, 95% on what they made there? They can take it all, just like they can take everything of a corporation, because they treat us like we are little corporations, just as Romney said in his campaign in the past election. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. Well,
and I find it highly offensive and insultive to be treated like a corporation.
Yeah.
It's wrong. It's sin. It's evil. It's wicked, and it needs to stop.
But it's legal.
Yeah, it's legal. It's
immoral. Legal has nothing. Legal has nothing to do with morality.
That's correct. That's correct.
Right. You don't mix the two, folks.
Yeah.
Did we answer your question there, buddy? Or
well, remember that saying, corporations aren't people? How's that saying go?
Corporations exist for the benefit of the government.
For the benefit of the state. Hale versus Hinkle. That's right.
Well, you can understand that this is something I've heard of, I'm slightly aware of, and it's really frying my brain cells. I understand it a little bit, but if you told somebody out on the street, they wouldn't have a clue. They would not.
Well, that's why I don't organize on the street.
Of course not. They're busy watching Captain Kangaroo and everything else is on the boob tube. Sure.
I don't think Captain Kangaroo's on any longer.
I guess that was a few years ago I used to watch.
You've dated yourself, man. But
well,
look,
Yeah, go ahead. When were we established as corporations? Was this in 1933? I know that federal government was incorporated in, 1871?
Washington, D.C. Well, this is when they did it. Remember, the Jesuits, I have 7 transitions of American citizenship. That's what you can get that CD on my website. It's a PowerPoint. So 433 slides. And I show the 7 transitions. The first transition is the 14th Amendment, making federal citizenship national. The second transition is slaughterhouse cases, where they decided that the privileges and immunities of 14th Amendment citizenship do not include common law rights, fundamental rights. The third stage is the registration of birth certificates.
Yeah.
And the birth certificate is modeled after the Roman Catholic baptismal certificate.
And may I interject?
Because you see, every Roman Catholic is a citizen of the sovereign state of Vatican City and holds dual citizenship. He's a citizen of Rome, sovereign state of Vatican City, and a citizen of the United States by virtue of his filed baptismal certificate. Well, the Jesuits just doubled that. They just copied that with all the indicia of the birth certificate.
Right.
So on the state level, because all property is on a state level, the birth certificate was filed registering the baby as property. The commander-in-chief comes along on March 6, 1933, declares a state of national emergency under the Trading with the Enemy Act, and thereby reduces everybody in the country to seized property. They become booty of the commander-in-chief. And the moment that took place, that's when your status changed from being a private citizen to a public citizen. It was approved and confirmed 3 days later by Congress. So on March 9th is really when it is legally done, where everybody became a public U.S. citizen like a corporation, a person under the Emergency Banking Relief Act, which includes individual, partnership, corporation, and I think or association. And that's when it happened. And then in 1939, they imposed the income tax. And then on, we've been under socialist, communism, radical democracy of the military government.
But more importantly, that nothing like this nature was invented here. It was invented in 1838 in Britain, following up on the collapse of their banking system and the seizure of all of the indigents and all of the persons through the creation of the Birth, Death, Registration Act. And that same system was then the original writ of birth or the original writ of death, which is an hypothecation of the government's ownership of that name and commerce, following up on the 1666 Sesquicu v. Act of Charles II after the London fire, saying that I'm going to seize all of the children and all the indigents. They're not under my protection. I'm the trustee, right? So that the structure of the
Charles II, controlled by the Jesuits, remember.
Right, and his brother being the Duke of Albany of Scotland and the Duke of York of England.
Yep.
James II, right.
Yep.
Right. Who took over New York and pushed the Dutch out. Yep.
Pushed Protestants out. Yep.
Well, I know the income tax. One of our chat room writers said on your advertisement, you say you're a non-taxpayer. How about us? Listen, I do know that from what I read, what I understand, that there is no law that says you have to pay income tax.
Wrong. Absolutely wrong. That's more patriot nonsense. The law that requires individuals that are little corporations to pay the income tax is Emergency Banking Relief Act, 12 United States Code 95A when it made everybody a person, an artificial person, under the military jurisdiction of this military government, so that we can be treated like a corporation. That's the law.
And the human being pays the taxes for the corporation. That's what it's done.
The man is not the person. John Calvin, if you read his Institutes, he says the man is not the person. The man is clothed with the person. So therefore we're seen as clothed with this artificial person, and we're surety responsible that this artificial person has to pay all income taxes.
And it's the idea of ceasing to be the surety and registering that status.
And that's how I did, of course.
As a treaty of peace, in effect. You're the occupying government.
And further, you're becoming a Section 1, 14th Amendment private citizen of the United States, once again, as defined in Hale versus Hinkle, and therefore you're outside of the military jurisdiction. A private citizen cannot be given military due process of law.
Right.
And a public citizen is not protected by the 14th Amendment.
That's well. Remember the 14th. That's right. He's not protected in any rights, but the 14th Amendment protects the official, natural private citizen. It's a two-edged sword.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, nothing but trouble. We're gonna have to see if we can get this figured out. We had Tom Lacavera. You disappeared. He was on the line here just a minute ago. He's got a lot of information on the 14th. I know. We were discussing some of these areas.
Yeah, well, I know the typical patriot position, and that's the 14th Amendment is not properly ratified, and I will agree with that because what was the state of Louisiana had a big thing in the Congress in 1967, but that's a moot point. We can't deal with that in court. We have to deal with the fact that we are protected under that. What was intended for evil, God worked it for good. So that when we were put under military government, that 14th Amendment protected our private citizenship status and protected a civilian due process of law on a state level, and the 5th Amendment protected a civilian due process of law on a federal level. That's all there is to it. And without the 14th Amendment, we have no King's X. We have no place to go back to. There's no such thing as primary state citizenship. That's nonsense. 14th Amendment made citizenship national for both blacks and whites. I prove it in my class.
We've got Tom Lacavera on the line. Tom, you're hot.
Hey, how are you?
Hi, Tom.
How are you, sir? I've waited to talk to you for quite a while. I look forward to. I'm sorry it was so late. I just got in, but I'd love to really dig into you with the 14th Amendment situation. Sure. I differ respectfully. I differ in opinion regarding the 14th Amendment. In 1868, when those 11 state delegates were forced out and threatened at gunpoint, 2 senators were kidnapped to be brought to the quorum in one state. My state, New Jersey, Senator John Stockton went to the House floor after coming back trying to withdraw their position on the 14th Amendment, said that the integrity of the United States Senate had been molested. And there was a reason. There was a usurpation that went from the 13th Amendment, removing that. They came in 1812 and burnt down all of our documents. Then that was in order to set up the 14th Amendment that created a national, you're very true, a national citizenship. But the problem is that we don't live in a country called the United States. We're independent nation states. And what they did was usurp those states' rights when they did that. So
I can't agree with you more. I can't agree with you more. If you read Alexander Stevens' work, the Constitutional View of the War Between the States, he'll tell you the horrible monstrosity of shoving the 14th Amendment down the throats of the Southern states. And that's the reason why the Southern states fought the war. It wasn't to preserve slavery. It was to prevent centralization of power. And your state, New Jersey, indeed, God bless them for that. Well, that's why President Andrew Johnson said if Lee was resisting the centralization of power in the 14th Amendment, then he was a hero. That's what Johnson said. So your state of New Jersey, your state of New Jersey was absolutely right. They refused to go along with the supposed ratification of the 14th Amendment, and I say just as that I have it in my notes that there were not enough states to do the ratification. It was simply proclaimed ratified on July 28, 1868. But that wickedness that was done can work for good for us because the 14th Amendment still protected a de jure constitutional government as opposed to a de facto statutory military government, giving military due process.
I would have to agree with you there. I would have
to. So therefore, we have to use that for good in this case. And if we can't get any relief like this, and I'm sorry to say this for all of you here, but the only thing to do is for your state to issue a Declaration of Independence, because we're exactly in the same place we were at the time of the American Revolution when George Washington said, "The King of England has treated all of us in Virginia as though we're conquered people in a conquered territory."
Well, they did. Cornwallis even said so that the military battle may be over, but I do believe he said something about a holy war coming. And your work with on the Jesuits is extensive. And my position is this: I believe that the Civil War, the greatest part of the Civil War, was when you review the statements of Albert Pike and a lot of the things that he was into. I believe that, and he had a Jesuit right alongside of him. 600 people murdered when the Union soldiers went off to battle. Pike sent Indians. He had groups of Indians that were trained to do this, to go in and murder.
It was the Sioux in Minnesota. And do you know who they murdered? Do you know who they were? You know what those people were? They were white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Lutherans.
Yes.
It was furthering the Council of Trent and killing off the Protestant Reformation.
Yes,
and Pike was tried and found guilty of treason, and he was pardoned by Andrew Johnson because they were both brother Freemasons. Both brother Freemasons.
To this day, with all of the to-do about the Confederate flag and racism, while his statue is in the middle of Judiciary Square in Washington, D.C.
That's right. That's right. Why does Jesse Jackson, that black Freemason, want to get rid of the great Nathan Bedford Forrest out of Memphis when he will say nothing of Albert Pike in Washington, D.C.?
Well,
that white devil.
Linked in with him. He's linked in
That's
with him.
correct.
Too.
That's exactly right. And Nathan Bedford Forrest was not a practicing Freemason. He took more prisoners than anybody took in the war, 31,000 prisoners. He was a great hero of the war. So we have to trash Nathan Bedford Forrest and anybody else who truly wanted to have a free South. And so we're going to make all the white men angry by removing his statue out of Memphis and by abandoning the stars and bars. And that's a further step to drive all white men into right-wing fascism. Because most white men today are angry and they're ready for war. And all it's going to take is a little domino to push it, like you watch the movie V for Vendetta, when he just kicks the domino. All it's going to take is one incident, and we're going to have right-wing fascism here that's going to be absolutely fierce.
Now, I don't know if there's not a whole lot of time left. I wanted to share this quick story with you. I descend from a family in Vermont and Massachusetts, Salem, Massachusetts, and Burlington, Vermont. My family owns a mountain to this day in outside of Montpelier that was part of the Underground Railroad. So growing up, I had the benefit of this old-timer down the road. His name was Les Buck. The man was 99 years old and he was still walking us around telling us stories. My uncle and he took me to a cemetery, a black cemetery on the mountain, where I have a number of my relatives that are laying, officers that fought for the North, that are laying in graves there on that mountain. And the one thing that I remember that he said, he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "You will not ever join the military." Now, they were sending me off to military school, but he said, "You will not join the military. Your job is to learn the true history of what happened here, because our ancestors, your ancestors, essentially lost their lives for fighting for the wrong side once they found out the truth." See, they had a spot in the floor of the barn that's still there to this day. That's a false floor that they would hide slaves. Now, this is in Vermont. This is way up north in Vermont, and I was told that the slaves were held primarily by factions in the North that were in cahoots with those in the South, the Freemasons of the South, and the plantation owners were all in with Pike. They were all in with Freemasons. This was all contrived. This whole racial thing, they knew in in those days, in the 1800s, they knew that there would come a day that they were going to use all of this to create a Marxist race war. And that is exactly what we see unfolding.
Marcus Garvey said in 1920, if things don't change in this country, there will be a race war between 50 and 100 years. And for him telling that truth, they prosecuted him for mail fraud, threw him in jail, and then deported him back to Jamaica.
Yep.
My point being this, that slavery was being abolished. The white Protestants of the North they were abolishing slavery by gradually emancipating the slaves, happening in Virginia. There was over 60,000 of them that were gradually emancipated, and then they were returning to Africa, to Liberia, of which James Monroe built the capital. And you can read about this. You can read about this in History of Slavery and the Slave Trade by W.O. Blake. And Joseph Roberts, the first governor there, encourages American blacks to come back to Liberia, where we have beautiful weather and all these beautiful fruits. But if you don't want to work, don't come here.
Sir,
so my point being is we were having a gradual emancipation. The Jesuits said, we can't have this because they're going to end slavery here. They're going to have gradual emancipation. Then we can't use the blacks to incite race war. Because remember, the purpose of the first Reconstruction, was to incite a black on white race war, and the reason why it didn't happen is because the black Protestants and the white Protestants and Baptists were generally good to their slaves, and they couldn't incite a race war in the South like they did in Haiti in 1799.
You know, that's what Cliven Bundy was trying to say when he got blasted so hard in the press. That's exactly what he was trying to say, because he knows the true history. And we spoke for hours on the subject. I mean, he knows the true history. We were overthrown. Our republic, it was at odds from the beginning, but in 1868, we were overthrown. That was 2 years after the Civil War. We were
right. The purpose of the war between the states, I never call it a civil war. The purpose between the war between the two sovereign nations of the North and the South was the Jesuit control of the radical red Republicans in the North, which Dabney calls the Jacobins, to enforce a universal equality on the Southern men of the South for their personal destruction. And the men of the South, primarily the white men of the South, were white Protestants and Baptists. The most heretic and condemned population in the world at the time, marked by the Council of Trent for destruction. That was the
I agree.
Folks, we're just about out of time here. Listen, Tom, you've got a site called resurrecttherepublic.com if you want to get a hold of him. Listen, we've got about 30 seconds. I got another caller here. Lamont, you've got about 30 seconds, buddy. Sorry.
Thank you, brother.
Hey, Lamont. Hey, guys, this is Lamont. You guys did a kick-ass show. It's Lamont from New York. I love it all together. One thing that we have to recognize is that these people who are doing this, the Jesuits and those who are the Knights of Malta and all these cats here, think lesser of those of us, no matter what ethnic background you are, no matter what diversity of background. Now, for those who've been cast aside in this country based on the 13th Amendment, and then ratified and put into the 14th Amendment, you did the right thing. I think we have to declare not only the states to declare independence, but for each individual human being who's living in United States territory to declare themselves individually a declaration of status or nationality of indigenous native to the land before the 13 colonies. And then you and I can talk privately about other things. But as far as the black issue is concerned, it's a race riot. It's the King Arthur plan being implemented, the King Arthur plan, where King Arthur planned that crazy nonsense of just exterminating black people and starting a race riot, because these guys